Hey everybody, here's the video on how I did the back piece and how I did the headliner as I promised earlier. So the back piece was difficult because the ribs that go across basically there isn't one back here to be able to connect a 1/2 inch piece of plywood to it. So you have to basically figure out a way to connect to a vertical surface, which is kind of a pain. So what I ended up doing was I wanted to follow the curve of the van. And like I said before in my previous video, the 1/2 inch plywood actually is flexible enough that you're able to actually bend that. So when I bring boards in, when I bring the siding in, I want to be able to actually have it line up. And I'll give you a close-up of this in a second. So I ended up cutting this board as a curve to match the actual curve of this. But then what I had to figure out was, how do I actually get the height of this to be a 1/2 inch lower than this board? So what I did was I took the 1/2 inch piece of plywood, and I took it and I lined it up. I actually used a longer one that actually marked off two of these ribs. But I put it up here and I basically lined it up, and then I actually marked on the van with a pencil. So right on the side. So I marked a few spots all the way across, which gave me a reference line to follow as to where I would line the board up. But then I had to figure out how to actually cut the board. So what I did is I used handy dandy dividers, and I actually took the board and I put it up a flat board just like this as a template. And all you have to do is just basically measure that distance, whatever that distance is. And I don't have the caliper set to that right now. And basically what I did was I scribed a line. So I mark it, and then I actually take it, mark that distance, which isn't correct right now, and then I just scribe that line all the way across. And then I cut that curve on my bandsaw. A jigsaw would obviously work just as well, but I cut it with my bandsaw. So then I was able to actually line up this board on those marks that I had made previously, that reference line I made previously, and then I could screw this in. And what that does then, I'm gonna move the camera here. What that does then is allow me to actually have the 1/2 inch board come in and land right on top of this. And it will actually follow that curve all the way down. So it will match the curve of the rib in front of it all the way across. And to actually do the install, I'll be screwing directly into the 1/2 inch plywood for the actual ceiling panels. But what I'll do right here is actually use construction adhesive on this, which should hold pretty well because the boards will actually be screwed in multiple places. So that's how I managed to get in on this vertical surface. So that part was a little bit hard to figure out, but that's how I did it. Hopefully that will help somebody else in the future. I think it's going to be pretty secure and pretty stable when it's all said and done. So that's how I did the back piece. Okay, so for the front piece, here's what I did. It's a little difficult to see because I actually have pieces installed right now. But for those that don't know, there is actually a rib, just like the rest in the ceiling, that actually runs right underneath this headliner. Now, I've seen a lot of people where they actually they cut the headliner straight off right here. They cut it all the way across and they put a 1/2 inch board right on that rib. I didn't actually want to cut the headliner because then I didn't really feel like there was a way to secure the headliner in, and it may rattle or shake over time. I wanted to continue to use these push buttons. So what I did was I actually connected to the rib that's back here by using some 3/4 inch pieces of plywood. And if you look at the ribs, they all have an angle on them right here. And for what it's worth, the angle on the front is approximately 30 degrees. How I calculated that doesn't really matter, but it basically is around 30 degrees. So what I did is I took a chunk of plywood and I cut it at a 30-degree angle on the back. And then I actually put a rivnut into this and actually secured this block right to the rib that's underneath the headliner. And I did 4 of those across. And then once I actually put the rivnut in, I actually put construction adhesive because it's only a single contact, which means that the board could potentially spin. So I put some construction adhesive on the back of it, and then I put the rivnut in and secured it in and let that dry, which actually worked really, really well. And then I installed a 1/2 inch piece of plywood, which actually continues to follow the curve like the rest of the van. And when it comes up to the 2x6, it continues to line up. So I should be able to bring a board in right there, and it should line up just like the rest of the ceiling. So that worked out fairly well. I was able to actually install the headliner right back over this, and it just kind of flexes around these little 3/4 inch pieces of plywood that I had. So now it doesn't really move and it's not flopping around. I was really happy with that. If anyone really notices, I actually have these in with drywall screws right now, which is totally not what I want to do. They're too brittle for the van. I just ran out of the wrong screw size. So I'll be getting some new screws to actually put in there that are not drywall screws. But essentially that's how I did that headliner. It took me a little bit to figure that out, but that worked out fairly well. I think it's going to be pretty good. I still need to frame out the fan to bring it down and bring a piece across to the next rib on the ceiling. That's kind of the last piece on the ceiling that I need to frame out, and then it should be done. So anyways, that is how I did the headliner.